So with each passing day, we get closer to the sweet, sweet day of June 21st, when we can all play Elden Ring's DLC. Like most of you, one of my favorite things about the Souls series is getting my ass kicked. No, seriously. A challenging boss with the intention of making you get good is a highlight of the Souls series for literally every player. And since we're all just waiting around for Elden Ring's DLC, it's time to talk about the top 10 hardest bosses in the Souls series. For our number 10 spot, I was actually going to have Midir to start off our list, but after extensively thinking about these two fights, I settled on Guardian Ape from Sekiro. What makes Guardian Ape harder in my opinion is the fact that he's harder to predict than Midir. The more interesting thing From Software made Guardian Ape do is that he moves very sporadically, like a beast. It makes sense that he would be designed that way, and he does this far better than Midir. Midir is not only a long endurance test, but he's also a very telegraphed fight. He hits hard, but he's slow. But From Software threw players a huge bone with him by locking the camera on Midir's head. So if that initial camera moment clicks with you, then for the most part, you can focus on what Midir's head is doing for the majority of the fight. But the Guardian Ape's sporadic nature requires you to twist your brain in a way that's unique to the Guardian Ape fight itself. Since most of Sekiro's enemies are melee-oriented fights, subconsciously, I think you develop the skill of intuiting how enemy attacks will naturally flow within the fight. And Guardian Ape simply doesn't do that in his first phase. The main point of contention with this fight is his second phase. Midir only gets harder as the fight goes on. Guardian Ape only gets easier. Since Guardian Ape wields a physical sword in phase 2, you can rewire your brain back to Sekiro mode and go back to reflecting melee sword attacks. But his phase transition also goes both ways. You have to have the necessary mindset of being able to quickly understand two completely different enemy attack styles. Both of them also have a way to make these fights drastically easier, with Midir going into his stagger phase, and you can use the thrusting spear on the Guardian Ape. I know I compared these two fights really closely for the number 10 spot, and that's because I would say they would both fit here. I simply couldn't decide which one is actually harder. The Orphan of Kos in Bloodborne really captures the combat in this game, and with him encapsulating Bloodborne's individual challenging aspects, I think he is a great demonstration on how fun and fair Bloodborne usually is. From Software has developed challenging bosses and moveset for years at this point, but what makes the Orphan unique is with the other 8 bosses we have on our list today, he is one of the most fair and challenging fights while being in Bloodborne's combat. Without spoiling too much, Sekiro bosses are going to be coming up more and more, and Sekiro is one of those games that needed to be challenging but fair. There's only one way to play Sekiro after all, but Bloodborne offers multiple variations to play with, and that's what makes this fight so masterful. From Software really upped the boss design in the DLC, and I think what I really appreciate is, with all of the Old Hunter boss fights, they are far harder to parry with your gun. With how fast and relentless the Orphan is, parrying him isn't as simple as it is with most bosses in the base game. He is moving and attacking so quickly that parrying him becomes less and less important the longer his fight goes on. I think matching his aggression to take advantage of the rally system is the best way to handle this fight, since his damage and speed is quite high. As I wrap up this fight, I cannot stop thinking about how much I want a Bloodborne 2. Sony, please do something with this IP. A fight I would assume most people have not beat is Inner Father, and he is going to take the 8th spot for this list. What makes the Inner Father one of the more challenging fights in the series isn't so much his complex moveset, but how his fight is one of the longer endurance tests in the series. He's quick, nimble, and always wants to check you. Inner Father will check your mental fortitude in a few different ways. When he depletes your posture bar, he will attempt to stomp on Wolf's body and essentially wipe out the rest of your health bar. In his inner form, he has a new combo string where he uses the Mist Raven prosthetic to quickly weave together multiple combo strings, which is completely unique to the inner form. And lastly, in his second phase, he will transition into his owl form, and you have to quickly follow the owl with your camera, or he will sneak attack you from behind. In a way, he's kind of tricky. He has quick combos, disappears, and it's easy for him to deceive you because a man of his size seems more like a powerhouse, not a nimble powerhouse. Continuing with the theme of being tricky, you also have to alter your playstyle against him. He interjects his teachings that he taught Wolf into the gameplay, with him being able to Makiri counter Wolf if the player holds R1. It really feels like From Software were able to create such a fun and engaging challenge by making him harder than his great shinobi form and forcing the player to play around his rules, not just yours. To end Inner Father, I have to say he may be my favorite fight in the entire series. It's either him, Gale, or Ludwig. I honestly cannot decide which one of these I like more. It also really makes me happy to say that because those 3 are from completely different games, so they offer different challenges in unique and fun ways. I think Ornn and Smough continues what Inner Father started, and that's being another endurance fight. Not just because of the fact that these two are a duo boss, there's more to that statement than just that. What makes Ornn and Smough one of the most unique duo bosses to this date is the fact that they're both melee and equally aggressive. So you have to have the proper game sense of picking your time to fight and then when to run away. Some people may find this a little bit boring, and that may even be why From Software moved away from what Ornn and Smough uniquely did. Let's use the Ring City Bats as an example. It's better to unlock your camera for these guys since you will have to deal with multiple attacks from different angles simultaneously. But for the most part, one of the bats is ranged, the other is melee. It's a perfect combo, and most of the time it removes the downtime that Ornn and Smough undeniably have. There will be times when both Ornn and Smough are attacking and moving at unpredictable times where their punish windows will be slim to none. Smough will get done attacking and then Ornn will eliminate the punish window or vice versa. That statement loops us back to Inner Father. Both of these fights are long and challenging. These two also have the trait that Guardian Ape has, and fighting the second phase is easier than the first phase. The second phase is a less stressful 1v1 encounter where the traditional Dark Souls combat loop arises. The moveset may be a bit more complex, but nothing more complex than juggling two different movesets and enemies simultaneously. Ornn and Smough feel like a one-of-a-kind duo boss, and not in a bad way. The newer duo bosses that aren't poorly designed usually have one ranged or extremely passive, and one is the main target to focus on. Ornn and Smough both demand a 50-50 split on focus, and I wonder if I will ever see a duo boss that demands that split and it's not something poorly designed and frustrating like the subhuman, despicable mutts that we are about to talk about. Godskin Duo is hard. This whole list is about the hardest bosses in these games, but not only are they hard, they are offensively hard. From Software created a magical game with Elden Ring, and by no means does Godskin Duo ruin it, but the game is already super long, so to add on extra playtime with nothing unique is really annoying. I can only foresee two reasons the Godskin Duo was put into Elden Ring. The first possibility is that From Software really wanted to do something unique with these two bosses, and at the final content push of Elden Ring, a unique boss was cut from the game. The only reason this possibility comes to mind is because Elden Ring does not have a true duo fight like Ornn and Smough. The duo fights in this game are just two enemies that don't work well with each other's kits, thrown into a catacomb dungeon. They're not interesting and they're not fun. But what I really see being the definitive answer is nothing more than a simple asset stretch. It's definitely not a secret that Elden Ring is a very, very large game, and in order to design all of that content for Elden Ring, a lot of it had to be asset stretched to make it worth the time and money. That's a given with any open world game, but I would have rather seen these two stretched in some other unique way. And not only do these assholes have stretched bodies, they are also asset stretched within an asset stretched boss fight. You end up killing these guys a handful of times before the fight really ends. In this footage here, I killed them 4.5 times. Yes, you heard that correctly. This boss is so awful that when I dealt the final blow to the gluttonous one, he fell over and died even though he had close to full HP. There's really not much to say besides these two are hard for the sake of being hard. Their movesets were never meant to work together, and it's a real pain for players like myself who like to play the game without summoning. It feels so intentional to summon here, but since I am stubborn, I choose to take the painful way, and complain about it on my video. The bats in the Ring City DLC offer a perfect dynamic in terms of difficulty. Almost everything that the game demands is required to overcome this challenge. You have to be good at managing your camera since there are two enemies to keep track of. The fight is long, so you need to have a strong mental fortitude. Sometimes their attacks will layer over each other like Ornn and Smough, so you need to learn when to respect these two and the countless other skills in these games in general. What I am essentially saying is that every skill required in the mainline Souls games is pushed nearly to the max in this fight. It's like the final test, and you need to know every mechanic to its peak potential. And after saying that, the only other boss that From Software has created that tests those skills as well as these guys is Ishin, in my opinion. What makes this fight stand out even more is the fact that depending on which of these two you kill last, the reincarnation has a new special move. This is sadly an underutilized mechanic, and I wish From Software did this type of thing more often. And after dumping what this fight forces you to overcome a few seconds ago, I think that I have come to the conclusion that this fight is one of the most fair and balanced fights From Software has ever made. Malenia will be on this list, and she is quite frankly unbalanced in my opinion. She has one move that really defines her kit, while these two enemies have a variety of moves that define their kits. Continuing with the trend of duo bosses on this list is Sister Frieda. There are a multitude of things that make her hard, but something that sticks out for her is she is one of the fastest enemies in Dark Souls 3 and probably the fastest boss in the game. She almost feels like Lady Maria from Bloodborne. I mean, they both have the same attack where they jump in the air and slam down. Not only is her boss fight 3 phases to always keep you on your toes, but she also has unique moves in all 3 of those phases. Her phase 1 adds a challenge in a unique way for her fight. Dying on phase 3 will set you back, and her first phase is a warm-up for phase 3, and since phase 1 and phase 3 work together, From Software were able to create such an intricate and long fight that's this long and hard. The final phase does have the ice and dark magic for you to deal with, and not only are you learning some of the basics of her phase 3 moves, but you are also learning how to deal with her invisible moves. The invisible move she does would really throw me off guard on my first kill, so much so that I had to play this game at level 1 to really understand the flow with her fight. I think Sister Frieda is the peak of difficulty you can achieve without completely and fundamentally changing the flow of the boss without doing a transition like Ludwig's where it completely changes how he plays. Think of how different Ishin plays from phase 1 to phase 2. Like he pulls out a fucking gun with how drastic it is. Since we're getting to the top 4 spots, I hope that Shadow of the Erdtree breaks into the top 4 at least one time. I don't play Elden Ring as much for the bosses and more so for the level design and exploration. So if it doesn't, I really wouldn't be all that upset because I think the level design and exploration are the highlights of Elden Ring. Not only is Ishin a very hard boss, with this whole fight being 4 phases since I am counting Genichiro for this fight, but he's also a masterclass in boss design. I have said this before, but Sekiro is the closest game I have ever played that's close to perfection. I truly have very few complaints about this game, and not only do I have few complaints, but it's also pushed the needle of what combat and boss design can achieve in gaming. Okay, back to the core of the fight itself. So, as I said, this fight is a 4-phase fight. By the time you get here, Genichiro should be a bit of a pushover. You struggled on him for probably an hour, or if you're really shit like me, I was on him for about 4 hours on my first playthrough. But what makes this fight really challenging is it pushes Sekiro's melee reflecting combat to its max potential. This fight is also long, and it has a drastic change in rhythm as each phase transitions. You fight Genichiro, then Katana form Ishin, then his spear form, to finally bringing back the lightning change. You have to be willing to adapt on the fly, similar to Guardian Ape but with 4 different styles of play. It's what makes him so hard. He also has a trait in his second and third phase that Owl has, and it's that he hits very hard. Some of his attacks will wipe out 3/4 of your health bar, and with his spear not being the usual katana that you are used to reflecting, it also forces you to adapt to that as well. His spear will drag on the ground while he's wielding it, making it so you have to delay your deflect in order to not get hit by it. And since his spear has high DPS, you will die due to simply being thrown off. It's a nice way to end Sekiro and not have it just be another katana wielding foe. It brings back what you already knew and adds something that you're not used to. Not only is the Demon of Hatred a hard fight for the many reasons that we will talk about in his section, but he's also a long fight. He's probably the longest trial in all of From Software's games. He's a constant back and forth swing of attacks. The Souls games have fights that are long, but sometimes the length is a bit artificial. A great example is the Subhuman Godskin duo. It's common for that fight to be a bit long, but you're also going to have a lot of downtime in that fight that really only consists of you waiting for your turn to attack. Nothing of interest is happening, and these 2 enemies are attacking simultaneously, so sometimes you just can't do that much. This is where the Demon of Hatred becomes a magical and really a genius fight. I will go as far to say that the Demon of Hatred may be the second best designed fight in Sekiro, only sitting behind Genichiro. This boss manages to work in Sekiro without being too annoying and breaking the game. He's definitely not a fight you can beat once and understand. I feel like you need to beat him multiple times to really get a grasp on what he actually does. Part of what makes him so challenging is that he is one of the few bosses in Sekiro that is heavily reliant on proper shinobi prosthetic tools. That's part of what makes Sekiro's balance so fine, is that the melee-oriented fights don't absolutely require the perfect prosthetic arm, but non-sword wielding bosses usually have a great weakness versus certain prosthetic tools. So what's this magic prosthetic arm that I'm speaking of? And that is the fire-resistant umbrella. The demon has a lot of fire whip attacks that he will do with his hair, and they will put a debuff on you. But when you use this umbrella, you can negate most of these fire whips that are hard to parry. It makes the fight considerably easier. I have beaten this boss a handful of times, and I can say that this tool makes the fight considerably easier than any other prosthetic tool can with other fights. And when you don't have this tool, then he's arguably harder than Ishin, since he forces you to play Sekiro unlike Sekiro. But continuing on with his umbrella weaknesses, if we use the thrusting spear on Guardian Ape as an example, it's only useful during his second phase, and the firecrackers are only useful on his first phase. These are very useful prosthetic tools, but they won't be something you will be using at all times. They are situational on when they should be used. The thrusting spear is quite obvious if you know about the boss exploit, and the firecrackers on his first phase seem to have a cooldown on when he is weak to them. In other words, he will be immune to them, so you cannot constantly spam him down throughout the fight. But since the Demon's Whole kit is based around his fire whips, you will be using this constantly throughout the fight. So not only does he punish you for poor game sense with your available tools, but like I said, he doesn't play like the vast majority of Sekiro fights. The game constantly forces you to reflect and taught you that the dash is pretty bad. They intentionally designed a fight that feels equally like a Souls fight and a Sekiro fight. You know, that honestly may be the most impressive thing about the demon, is that he is so well designed in a system that has many core mechanics that aren't used as often with his boss fight. Anyway, continuing on with his fight, his third phase is going to require you to keep your cool and not panic. He will force a ring of fire around his play zone, heavily narrowing the space you have to play in. The fire will eventually go away, but since you have to keep your cool when he ignites the fire to surround you, it adds another challenge beyond just recognizing attack patterns. I really respect this unique form of difficulty because it's not bullshit. In fact, I find it very engaging. We've seen fights with poor boss arenas that are just flat out annoying, but From Software having him cut the fight zone significantly is nothing more than a stroke of genius. It's a really intelligent way to make him even harder. Before I put this fight to rest, if you are a fan of Sekiro and made this same mistake that I did, I recommend killing him a few times to understand him more. I beat this fight one single time and didn't touch him for about a year or so before I tried him again. I thought he was a stupid fight, and I thought From Software was testing how a Souls boss would work in Sekiro. And while I may not be wrong, and just maybe From Software was seeing how players would react to a non-deflect boss in their deflection-based game, but I have to say he's not shoehorned in for that one reason. He's arguably one of the best designed fights in the game. I truly believe that, and I truly believe that he's a masterful boss and is underrated. And now we're at the one I think you were all expecting. The whole conversation around Malenia is an interesting one because there is really no way I can please everyone here. If I were to say she is perfect, someone will go on about how Waterfowl is bullshit, and if I were to say she's awful, someone will tell me to get good. I guess that's the nature of opinions, but Malenia specifically is a topic that no one seems to agree on. I bet we can all agree that Ishin is amazing, Gale is amazing, Ludwig is amazing, but people will not have the same opinion with Malenia's fight as a whole. So I fully expect that a vast majority of you are going to disagree with what I have to say about Malenia's difficulty, because she is the hardest boss on this list, and I also think she is the hardest boss in this series. But not all difficulty is created equally. So before I get too opinionated, I want to start off by listing a few interesting tidbits about her fight. Something that makes her slightly harder for no fault of the players is the fact that she is bugged. This specific bug makes melee users like myself have to consciously understand that getting her to 0 HP on her first phase means nothing. If you damage her to 0 HP when she is in a staggered state, she will not do her transition cutscene. I did some research on this, and it seems like this is an intentional bug that would stop players from completely cheesing her fight. I have never seen another Elden Ring boss with this glitch, and I don't know why From Software never found a way to fix all of the bugs with her specifically. The next important note with her is about her boss time. You would think she would have a long runtime with her Bloodborne rally heal, but in fact, the 2 bits of footage I have killing her were both shy of the 5-minute mark. So this isn't as much of an endurance test as you would think. I think I talked about the cliff notes extensively, and at the beginning of her section I mentioned that not all challenges are created equally, and shield users essentially get the worst end of the stick with Malenia. I do not know what FromSoft was going for when they said, hey, shield users are essentially going to have an unviable, long, and draining fight ahead of them. If someone wants to argue that using a shield is good versus her because you can safely remove the pressure of Waterfowl, then I would counteract that argument with the fact that the fight will turn into a slog with how long it will end up being. Long fights are great, but a prolonged fight because of one move is not fun. If FromSoft was worried that using a shield would be the definitive go-to answer for melee users, then I would traverse the conversation to Bloodhound Step, which is one of the most easy to use and consistently reliable Ashes of War to use against her. Since Waterfowl is such an impressive move, you're essentially removing half the challenge if you can easily and consistently dodge that move. Bloodhound Step just feels like the best way to play versus her because of how hard it is to dodge Waterfowl up close. And that's where I have to keep ranting about this one single move. Dodging Waterfowl up close isn't a get good issue, it's a get perfect issue. The only way that I've seen to dodge Waterfowl up close is to essentially maneuver around her when she starts the animation. This will cause her to fling herself away from you, making it so you just have to dodge through her like normally. Not only does this take an absurd amount of time of just testing through trial and error, but as far as I can tell, From Software didn't even try and nudge at the player that this was going to be the consistent way to dodge Waterfowl up close. What I ended up doing is just showing respect to Malenia when I knew Waterfowl's cooldown was up, because as I said earlier, Waterfowl is half of her challenge. And since it's such an impressive move that can outright kill you if she gets a good hit on you, it's best to play around the AI and barely engage with the game when you think she can start the move. I simply kept my distance. I played at a large distance as a melee player. Awesome stuff. I would wait for her to initiate the move or attack me head on. The last thing I will say about Waterfowl is if the move was removed from Malenia, she would be a joke of a boss. Here, let's play a game. I have to assume the first move you think of when I say Malenia would be Waterfowl. It's her deadliest move after all. But what is Sister Frieda's deadliest move? Does she have one move that is so dangerous that you have to change your whole build and playstyle versus her? I would say no. She does have a few long combos in her third phase, but nothing that will double dip the punishment of taking damage and healing herself. Plus, you can knock Sister Frieda out of her moves since she has no poise. And yeah, I'm going to do this just one more time to prove my point. The Demon Bats in Dark Souls 3. Its deadliest move is probably the Hellfire Balls it can summon, and this one single move can be completely avoided by which order you kill the bats in. I also want to note that since Greatswords are really good at trading since they are slow but powerful, fighting her is just more annoying as a Greatsword user. You can get the timing down pretty quickly to avoid needing to trade, but I can't deny that using a Greatsword just feels awkward. I know I just went on a rant about her difficulty in every way that I don't like, but let me list off what aspects she has that make some of her difficulty engaging. I think her and Genichiro crown the elated feeling I had when I actually beat them. These two are fights that pretty much everyone will be stuck at, and when you do beat them, it's really exciting. I beat Malenia solo after fighting her for a few hours, and it's a feeling I won't forget for a long time now. Her second phase also gives more moves that are challenging besides you-know-what. I do enjoy when bosses give the player a debuff, and while Malenia's isn't used as interestingly as Mohg's, I do think it's a fair challenge for how easy it is to use a consumable mid-fight. I think most people don't like the move where she sits in the air and throws her summons at you, but I find them to be a mostly interesting challenge. It is a bit annoying that I can't hit her, but I am willing to take that challenge on as a unique gimmick from her fight. And I think that's where I'll end Malenia. I didn't talk extensively about Spirit Ashes, and maybe that's the best counter-argument to her as a whole. I do not summon in Elden Ring, but with Spirit Ashes being essentially a free buff with zero downsides, maybe she was designed with the Spirit Ash in mind. If that is the case, then, well, I don't think that should be the case, and the old system in the previous games were already perfected. That's all I'm going to say about Malenia as a whole. I know I ended the video with people potentially being upset at what I had to say, but that's simply how I view it. She is the only boss in all these games I cannot reliably beat besides Blue Smelter Demon in Dark Souls 2, and I highly doubt I will ever be able to consistently beat her.